tell you. So everybody has the impression right now that President Obama, who is in Mexico and appealing to the Hispanic community for immigration reform, really wants immigration reform. And I'm not sure what kind of immigration reform he thinks is going to be passed with this Republican House of Representatives. I think the DREAM Act is a non-starter. The DREAM Act is the act that would have allowed young people who were brought to this country illegally by their parents to find a stepping stone to legal residency and then citizenship. It doesn't look like the Republicans want him to get his way. But what I want to bring to your attention is that this year, President Obama's administration is on board to deport the largest amount of illegal immigrants ever. 400,000 people are being deported this year, 2011 alone. Last year in 2010 was the next highest level. Since President Obama has taken office, he has aggressively with ICE, which is the acronym for the immigration bureaucracy, they have aggressively enforced deportation of anybody and everybody who's been picked up and eligible to be deported. So the Republicans who are slamming him like crazy and saying that, he's just a liberal politico who doesn't care about our terrible illegal immigration problem, they are simply wrong. You have to give the man his due if you're on that side of the aisle. On the other hand, if you're a Hispanic person or not a Hispanic person, just somebody who believes that the people that are here illegally from every part of the world deserve a hand up if they can prove that they're worthy of such a thing, you need to know that President Obama is speaking with forked tongue. He is absolutely speaking out of both sides of his mouth so that he can go to one audience and say, I've deported the most people in history and be absolutely truthful about it. And on the other hand, he can go to some other people and say, but I want to change the law, but this isn't fair. To my mind, you either stand for one or another. And I'll give you an analogy. The Defense of Marriage Act. President Obama was accused by his left-wing liberal supporters of not being nice enough, of not being sympathetic enough to the gay marriage movement. So what did he do? After he repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was a great achievement in his view of that, he then decided to instruct the Justice Department not to really enforce the Defense of Marriage Act. The Defense of Marriage Act was an act passed by Congress that basically said that marriage between a man and a woman is the only kind of marriage that should legally be recognized. And even though the Justice Department has been brought into cases in which they've been asked to defend it, the Obama administration has decided that in cases in which there might be an appeal to be pursued or things like that, they're not going to pursue an appeal. They're going to leave it like that. So in cases in which the judges have decided at certain levels that the Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional, our Justice Department is not going to aggressively support this. They're not spending manpower, resources, and money to defend an act which President Obama admits is something he doesn't agree with. Now that, by the way, is almost unprecedented. There are a couple of little precedents in the law for this, but they are very few and very specifically, they are not about this kind of policy. It is an extraordinary step for a president to not enforce an act of Congress. He may not like it. He may not agree with it. You know what the answer to that is, right? The answer is to repeal it or allow the judges to find it ultimately unconstitutional. See Marbury versus Madison. But our president has decided in his enormous authority and infinite wisdom that he is not going to pursue the Defense of Marriage Act because he doesn't like it, because he doesn't agree with it, because he believes it violates civil rights privileges. Okay. If you take that concept, take that analogy, work with me here, to immigration, and he really was someone who felt that our immigration laws were unfairly enforced, were unjust on their face, threw out people that the government really needed, were unfair to the Hispanic community, whatever, which is what he preaches to Hispanics, then he would not be leading the charge to deport 400,000 people this year. That's a lot of people. Do you know that we have chartered planes devoted to deportations? Do you know that these people very often do not have a hearing? They languish. Many of them, over 60, have died in New York jails alone. okay, because they don't have the right to counsel. Their family can't see them. This is actually, truthfully, a civil rights horror, what we've done to people. After all, they have, most of them, by far the majority of them, have been convicted of nothing more or less than not having correct paperwork. Really, a lot of them have come here as inspected people that have overstayed a tourist visa but that have otherwise been lawful citizens. Many of them have been working for years. They have paid taxes into Social Security for numbers that their employers gave them that they will never see benefits for. Many of these people are honest, hardworking people that would be direct descendants of our grandparents and great-grandparents if the system was otherwise 100 years ago. And you know that and I know that. It was a different system when our grandparents came through Ellis Island. It was easier. It was different. Now, I'm not suggesting that there aren't flaws with the system. I'm not suggesting that there aren't people that deserve to be deported, that are criminals, and then they should get the hell out of here. I'm not saying that that's not the case. I am saying that our president is speaking out of both sides of his mouth. And I think that's something that the Hispanic community ought to address with him. They shouldn't let him just get away with saying, we want this, I want this for you, I want that for you, and in the meantime deport 400,000 people. And, same sentence, the Republicans ought to recognize that this man has done more to deport more illegals than any Republican president ever did. I feel that the children that were brought here by the parents through no fault and will of their own ought to be able to go to school, even though they don't have a legal Social Security number. They ought to be able to get college degrees. I'm not saying they should be able to get state aid. My own kid can't get state aid. I am saying that we should give them a stepping stone to becoming a working, productive citizen in this country. And I mean citizen. I don't mean just resident. It's not their fault that their parents schlepped them here. If they're here from 2, 4, 6 years old, this is the only country they know. This is very often the only language that they speak. Notwithstanding, you think so many of them only speak Spanish. That's really not true. The kids that come here young speak English better than they speak Spanish. Their friends are here. Their relationships are here. They want to be Americans. Many of them are enlisting in our military. Come on. I think we ought to give these kids a break. And as far as their parents are concerned, we ought to revert back to the pre-Bill Clinton era, because Bill Clinton is the one that caused this mess, in which people that came here and overstayed a tourist visa, if they could show sponsorship with an affidavit of support and show that they had a job and show that they would not be a burden on our community, they were able to get up the ladder and regain legality. Do I think they ought to pay a fine? Yes. Do I think they ought to go to jail? No. No, I don't think so. I don't think we need to incarcerate people that are no threat to the public welfare. Do I think they ought to pay a fine? Absolutely. They did something wrong. They broke a law. They ought to pay a fine. But they have already paid a tremendous price of living in the shadows. I know people that don't get into a car without a toothbrush because they're so afraid of being picked up by a policeman. They know they'll never see the light of day again, and they want to make sure they have a toothbrush with them. The doors are closing. The noose is tightening. You didn't need years ago to have a Social Security number to go to school, to go to college. Now you do. If you don't have a Social Security number, you can't do anything. You can't get a bank account. You can't get a job. You can't go to school. When did we become a society so fixated on legality that Bobby Jindal, who hasn't even announced he's running for president yet, decided to submit his birth certificate? I mean, come on. When did we become such a Gestapo-like country where you have to say, show me your papers to do anything? This is who we are with 300 million people. We need to let loose a little bit. We need to come away from the fear and scare tactics of the last 10 years. We need to let our hair down. We need to use discernment and judgment. We need to go back to common sense. That's what we need to do to grow and be a free people. The rest of it is no good. It's no good. And as far as the illegals that are here, they ought to be able to come in the sunshine. And the ones that don't come in the sunshine ought to be deported, because there's a reason they don't want to come in on the sunshine. But there are women here. We have, for example, we have a very narrow asylum statute. In other words, under very, very narrow circumstances can women that flee husband beating, genital mutilation, all kind of horrible things going on in Arab countries, in African countries, even in Spanish countries, if they come here and they don't report themselves into authorities within, I think it's 30 or 60 days, the window of asylum is closed. Well, by 30 or 60 days, not only don't they know their way around, many of them can't speak any English at all. And it's a while before they become acclimated to a society in which women have rights. And by then, the door is closed. I knew a woman. I brought her to an immigration attorney right here in Connecticut. I said, please, if this woman is forced back to go to her country, he has already burned down her house in her country. He has already declared that he will kill her and her children. He was absolutely guilty of horrendous child abuse. When the children came here, two of them, they had mental illness, they had nervous breakdowns, they ended up in our local mental health hospitals for an extended period of time. Incontrovertible evidence that this guy is beyond horrific, and he's bought the police in his area. So if they go back, there's nowhere for them to run, nowhere for them to hide. I want to tell you this because there are specific circumstances of people, and our law is no longer just in the sense that it doesn't allow for specifics. When you have a law that doesn't rely on cases, that simply relies on the letter of the law, you have an unjust society. So I brought these women, a woman and two minor children, to an attorney, and I said, can I please help them? I believe they'll be productive citizens. One of them wants to become a nurse. They're graduating school, blah, blah. And he said, I'm sorry, Lisa, there's no way I can help these people. I can't help them. I can't do anything. The law gives me no room. There's no grounds for asylum. There's no grounds of wanting to fulfill a profession in which it's absolutely without controversy. We need more nurses here in Connecticut. These people are willing to do jobs that nobody else will do or want to do and that we need in healthcare. No good. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. So they live in fear. Now, you may say, well, that's not my problem. She made a bad decision to come here in the first place. Okay, you know what? She made a decision for survival. Her sister and her brother said, if you don't get out of this country and you don't get away from him, you're going to die, and we're afraid of it. So come stay with us as a visitor, and let's see what happens. She didn't know the law. She didn't know what to do. The time level passed. It's over. Do you think that's fair? Is that the kind of country that you think America was? Give me you're poor, you're tired, you're oppressed, yearning to be free? Who are we?